Hey, so this is a fun project that I'm working on. I started processing the lumber back in March, got it all sliced up. I let it climatize in the shop for about 3 weeks, and then I was able to start milling and sizing. Here's a little teaser clip. This is all made of cherry. Let me show you more. I began this project by creating some drawings, right? Scale drawings using a drafting arm and just making front views, side views, some detail shots. The detail shots are really important to make sure that everything's going to work, everything's going to fit. Initially, I began to use SketchUp, but I had to make some changes, and truthfully, I'm not that fast at SketchUp, so old school drafting is what I did. And then, just so I can wrap my head around some of the components or some of the areas that are maybe could be problematic, I make full scale drawings. That way I can make sure that all my dimensions and everything's going to fit. Of course, from there, I can start sizing some of the components, and I utilize the Panther router for all the mortise and tenons. And here I thought I had a clever stop, and this basically allows me to bring each component out past the table the same distance each and every time, right? I can lock it down, and every component that I put in place will have the same length tenon. It's kind of clever and it works well, but now Panther router has come out with something called a swing stop, and I'll show more on that. It makes this process way easier. All right, so rather than doing this, which worked, these guys came out with the swing stop. This thing's fantastic. So you can see how I've got it in the fourth groove, and in the fourth groove, this will accommodate up to 1.5 inch length tenon, or 38 millimeters, right? So you just simply put that in place, you swing it in, then you can bring your fence up to it. This has a flat edge where everything is parallel, coplanar, and perpendicular to the table. That butts right up to the swing stop, and then you can clamp that down, swing that out of the way, and then boom, make your cut. Or if you need something a little longer, this thing's really genius. You can go up to 2 3/4, which is I believe about 70 millimeters, by moving this dude into the third slot. Right in there. Same thing, lock her down. And boom, make your cut. Well, swing that out of the way first, then make your cut. Pretty cool, yeah? And boom, just like that. It's a beautiful and perfect fit. I made one test sample, and then I ran with all the mortise and tenons. This side is just dry assembled. Everything's fitting perfect, flush, beautiful, tight. Yeah. And here's some drawings that I made just to figure out some details. Yeah, man, progress. Working on the Panther router this morning, and I'm cutting these tenons. You can see that these are centered, right? By just using the thickness gauge and the scale, you can center your tenons dead on, nuts, balls, accurate. And so I needed another one, but I needed it to be offset by about 3/16 or this much. And so I can just put these spacers here, and boom, with the same setting without moving anything, I can set them up just like that. Okay, so here you can see I've got these components. I only have 4 of them that have this offset, and I marked them with tape. And so most of them
look like. Hey, that's kind of tight. Yeah, okay, there we go. You can see a little bit of an offset there, 3/16, that much. But this one, it will be flush on the inside. Like that. Boom, perfectly flush. And so with the same setting and a spacer, I can create that offset. And I was a little bit undersized when I first made this spacer, so 2 layers of tape or 1/28 of an inch that I added by adding the 2 layers of tape, or about 2/10 of a millimeter. So yeah, man.
So there are a couple ways to do these corners, or more than that actually, but you can make both tenons notched, one high and one low, so that they clear each other, and one part of the tenon will go over the other one, or you can do like I did here and just 45 them. The 45s don't actually meet in the corner, they're just 45 so that they clear each other. So here's one of the nightstands just dry assembled. The client wanted an arts and crafts or mission style, and so the corners of the legs are basically the styles. So this is one of 2 bottoms for the nightstands, right? And I'm just addressing the seam or seams and also that wood front edging. And here's a detail shot of where it'll meet the corner leg. And then after all the joinery was complete on the legs, then I could add the angles to the bottoms of the legs, or if they were curves, now would be the time to do that. This is my low angle Lie-Nielsen number 62, and originally I had bought it as a shooting plane, but then I ended up getting the Veritas dedicated shooter, and so occasionally I like just take it out for a spin, yeah.
So here's that Lie-Nielsen 62, and I thought I could use it for, a shooter, and I probably could, but I changed my mind after I bought it because I saw this dude by Tico Vote, and he makes them, and they fit this Veritas dedicated shooter. I tried to get this in left-hand version, but they were out at the time, so I got a right hand, which I'm pretty ambidextrous, so it works. This thing is a pleasure to use. Just phenomenal. You can see this back up here that's adjustable. He even provides a little wrench to accommodate that with a magnet, yeah. And a couple of attachments. This one is for, let's see, like this. Mag switch miters. Right? And then this dude for a 45, if you had a long piece like this, or a wide piece like an apron for a table, for instance, you could shoot that type of a miter. So yeah, fabulous. I love this thing. You can see he has used bamboo here, so it wears really well, or it's hard, so it doesn't wear, I should say. But yeah, fabulous.
At this stage, it felt really good to have the majority of the components for both the dresser and the nightstands complete. Here you can see I've got sub-assemblies made, backs, bottoms, sides. And yeah, of course, it's always a good idea to do a dry test, just to make sure that all the components fit and there aren't any surprises once you add glue. And I wish I could tell you where I got that small dead blow. I ordered it from Germany and I absolutely love it. And here's the first nightstand upside down on my table saw getting glued and clamped, and I'm just checking to make sure that the top and the bottom is exactly the same. Now's a great time to check for unwanted glue squeeze, and here in a bit I'll tell you why I didn't pre-finish the nightstand components.
Hey gang, so here it is out of the clamps, overnight, dried overnight, cured overnight, and extremely strong. I mean, you can just feel how solid it is. Everything's nice and tight. Of course, this missing rail, I'll show you that after a bit. So I used epoxy in all the grooves and then wood glue on the mortise and tenons. And so all the panels are glued in solid, extremely solid, creates this rigidity, perfect for carcass construction. Yeah, man, super pleased with that. All right, so those are all the parts for the substructure, and you can see pretty clean holes, nice radius inside corners, plenty of room for the drawer guide. That'll actually be like that. Yeah, plenty of room, and it'll just lighten everything up and still will remain very strong. All right, so this is part of the sub-assembly substructure, I guess. Kind of a carcass, the interior of this unit, and cherry, there's going to be a open area here. That's why that's cherry there. The rest will just be full of drawers, so it's just this birch plywood. And those grooves I cut at the panel router were made to accept this plywood. Something like that. There we go. Boom. And then this dude will glue onto that, and this is where the drawer guide will attach. None of this will be seen, but still want it strong and lightweight. So would this be classified as weird joinery? It's like, what? I'm not sure what's going on here. You can see long grain, solid wood, obviously. It's got a tin in there. Shop made plywood, veneered both sides. And this dude will go in here, maybe. Boom. Right? Panther router, mortise and tenons. Another panel in here, and something very special happening right here. Yeah, man. So when I talk about shop-made plywood, it's, well, I'm already using plywood, but my problem is that I was trying to find a specific thickness and it wasn't available. Shortages and COVID and all that jazz, right? So what I was able to find was some 5.5 millimeter plywood. It's not very quality. It's warped and it's thin. I needed something about 7/16 thick, or about what,
11 millimeters.
and so I found this stuff, and the one side, or actually both sides, were really smooth, and I thought would be good candidate for veneer. And so I utilized 2 pieces with some maple in betwixt, and you can see the grain is running this way on the plywood. The maple veneer runs perpendicular to that. I used epoxy between these layers to create this, and then on top of that I was able to apply face veneers, also running perpendicular to the plywood underneath, thusly creating this thickness that I needed. And it turned out to be a 13 ply plywood, shop made plywood, that's very stable and strong. All right, got some wedged mortise and tenon joints that sat overnight, and that is pretty ugly, but I like plenty of glue, so I skimped not. So we'll get this cleaned up, belt sander, and see how that looks, yeah? So I'm working on this cherry cabinet. It's actually a chest of drawers. There's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drawers, right? This will be open. This will have a door. And this thing's just dry assembled. No fasteners, no glue, just dry assembled, just joinery, baby, right? Mortise and tenon, panther router, mortise and tenon. You can see a couple that are through here, and those will be wedged because this will be covered with drawer fronts. So I just thought I'd make that nice and strong. There's actually another vertical piece that will go here and one here, and then this area here will get a light. And this dude, right? Magnets up in here. This is actually motion detected, so when this door opens, this will come on automatically. This guy goes like, boom. So this is rechargeable, just has a little USB, and they last for months. We've got tons of these in the house. They've lasted for years. Absolutely love these. These are by Hayfella, however you want to say that. Cool, right? And then these little dudes, these will be the place where the drawer guide will get attached. Those guys will go in there. You can see this is like carcass construction. So I create these cutout areas. This one has a cutout area as well. It just lightens things up, but keeps everything really strong. You get a lot of rigidity with this type of construction. So super pleased with the results, making good progress. All right, so these are just placed together and it's pretty tight here. Oh my, okay. So it's pretty tight here on this end and of course this end as well. Pretty tight, and then slight gap in the middle. It actually looks bigger on camera than it is, but that pulls extremely easy. Let me put a clamp on that and show you what I'm talking about.
So the idea behind a spring joint is to add a bit more pressure at the ends to allow for seasonal expansion and contraction when the wood starts to move seasonally.
Lightweight bar clamp, aluminum, right? You can see that gap there. Very little pressure, boom, closed.
Spring joints are easy to create. I just use a hand plane, a couple of swipes in the center to create that concavity.
So I've got some boards glued up, and these were all created using spring joints. I glued these two together first, spring joint, then I glued these two together, spring joint, then ultimately created another spring joint with these two and got everything clamped up. Now there's also a big debate about clamps. How many clamps, too few clamps, too many clamps? I don't think you can use too many clamps, but here's my philosophy. I like a lot of clamps with light to moderate pressure. I don't squeeze the crap out of these. They're not very tight, but I'm getting extremely good overlap in the clamping pressure. I think that's better than too few of clamps with a lot of pressure. So I like a lot of clamps, moderate to light clamping pressure.
Here's something else to think about. The working end or the handle end of a clamp is going to apply more pressure than the other end. So do with that whatever you'd like.
Another topic of debate is how much glue, right? I like plenty of glue. Glue is cheap, it's easy to clean. Some people proclaim that little beads of glue across the joint are just right. Well, maybe. But if you use a top coat type finish, if there's any places where there's not complete glue coverage, what will happen is something called surface tension can create little voids. Even though the joint is tight, I mean, these are joints here, they're dead tight, but without glue squeeze, the finish can come right to that edge and it creates this little line. You see it on, commercial residential cabinets where the doors are hooked together and you'll see, tight looking joints, but these little lines where the finish comes right to the edge. Surface tension keeps it from crossing over because there's not any glue going across that joint. So I get glue squeeze complete 100% with all my glue ups. You may have seen me talk about this before, but I've got these boards are glued up and I'm getting the glue off, and I don't want that glue on my hand planes. I don't want it on my sanders. we just don't want it anywhere, right? So here's an easy way to get rid of it. I have an old belt on my belt sander, and I'm going to soften that glue by going over it. Check it out.
So that's probably an old 120 or 150 grit belt, and the friction will soften that glue, right? And then you can easily scrape it off.
Once it's soft, I can hit it with a scraper and it comes right off. Boom. All right, so this is the bottom of the top, the bottom of the countertop, I guess. And you can see these beads of glue. To me, that would be inadequate for the top side. For the bottom, that's plenty because it's not about strength. It's about the finish and that surface tension that I was telling you about. But if this was the top, I would be worried, maybe upset. But I know a lot of guys shoot for just, you know, a bead occasionally here and there. And to me, that's not enough for a top coat type finish.
Before I talk about the chest of drawers, you may have noticed that the nightstands weren't pre-finished because they were open at the top and it was easy to get my gun in there to shoot them with lacquer. But typically, when I have sub-assemblies like this, I pre-finish.
All right, there's stage 1, or it's actually more like stage 7 at this point. All right, so here's the dresser assembly, and keep in mind this thing is upside down, and this entire carcass with the back is assembled and glued overnight, and now I can start to fit the two end panels. You can see one just sitting there, kind of dry fit going into these. The tenons are engaging there, and then all these areas, this part of this substructure will engage in this pocket. These drawer guide rails will engage between the front and back leg and contact here where that wood is raw. That will get glue, and then screws into the panel. And then of course the back will engage in that groove. So once that's all assembled, this thing will be very strong and extremely rigid. Just testing the carcass this morning after, you know, the glue setup, everything starts to get more and more rigid as the components get added. So I started pulling the clamps off before I got a shot of this, but you'll get the idea. So I had clamps top and bottom, of course, and the sides or the ends, they can bow out. So we ended up putting clamps across the middle, one down at the bottom, which is still in place. And then we had 2 at this location. But you can see here, if I put a clamp across there, it would squeeze in because there was a hollow here, this opening. So we ended up putting a little board in here just to keep that from collapsing that area. But the glue up went well. Used a 30-minute epoxy. Gave us plenty of time. I love using epoxy because it's slippery and the joints go together, and the back slipping into the grooves. All that would have been really challenging with wood glue, but yeah. Also, once everything was clamped up, we made sure that this thing was flat, which it actually wasn't. This front left corner was slightly low, and it's easy to check with these winding sticks. I just have this white piece of MDF that's dead parallel and a black one, same thing, and you line them up here. I like a white background, so I put the white one first and then the black one, and then I can use the wall as a background. And you just make sure that this edge is, same with that edge, and you don't have any twist. And because if it is twisted and it cures, your glue cures like that, you will retain that twist. So that's really important. Of course, we checked diagonals this way. Everything was dead on nuts. So super successful glue up, and I can remove these clamps and continue. So I am by no means a purist furniture maker. I do love antiques, and I like exploring, the processes and techniques of how things were built. However, you'll notice with my carcass construction, when I have cabinets or some kind of a box or a sideboard, for instance, I like using plywood interiors because it creates rigidity. Case in point with this piece here, rather than just, components that were made of solid wood and joinery going back for the drawer guide runners, which would just be placed here, and this would just be basically stick construction. like a frame made of wood. Rather than that, I like employing plywood because it creates all this rigidity. So if I lift up on this corner, this has been glued, this whole thing just comes up, nothing twists. There's no way that you're going to get any twist sideways. It creates an incredible rack resistance with all this plywood. And you can see that I cut it out so it'll be lighter. And so you get the best of both worlds. It's lightweight, but extremely strong. So I've always built cases like this. It is very effective, super strong, and I'm going to continue doing it because I know it works.
And that's it for this video. Come back for part 2. I've got some cool features to show you. And as always, thank you so much for watching.